You walk into your kitchen, you grab a glass from the cupboard and you turn on the tap. It's like the most mundane automatic action in the modern world. You expect crystal clear, cold water, but instead what pours out is this cloudy, brown, sediment-filled sludge.
Yeah, which is a deeply unsettling image.
Yeah.
And for good reason. It instantly breaks that unspoken social contract we have with our fundamental infrastructure. Like, you assume the water in your home is safe, and when it visibly isn't, the panic is immediate.
Right, absolutely. And lately, if you spend any time online at all, you've probably seen these viral videos of exactly this happening to people in rural communities. But the truly crazy part is the villain being tagged in all these videos.
Oh, yeah. It's not what you'd expect.
No, not at all. People aren't blaming a broken municipal pipe or like a natural disaster like a flood. They're looking at this glass of dirty water and blaming artificial intelligence. They're pointing the finger squarely at the massive new data centers popping up across the country to power the cloud.
Which creates a fascinating, almost jarring juxtaposition. Because we tend to think of the cloud as this ethereal, invisible, almost magical realm of algorithms, right? Floating data. Seeing it somehow physically manifest as mud in someone's drinking glass, it feels like a glitch in the matrix.
It really does. Well, welcome to our deep dive. We are so glad you're joining us today. Our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the noise of this massive, heavily debated thread of sources we have.
Yeah, we've got articles, local engineering reports, and some really intense online discussions.
Exactly. And we want to figure out what is actually happening beneath the ground.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a viral narrative that AI is ruining local tap water. Is it actually true?
Well, the videos are absolutely real. That muddy water is not a special effect. But the internet's diagnosis of why this is happening, it really misses the mark. It skips over some crucial nuances about how our physical infrastructure interacts with the digital world.
So they're blaming the wrong part of the process. Exactly. The media and the public have conflated the long-term environmental footprint of computing with the immediate, violent reality of construction.
Oh, okay, right. Because when we dive into the sources, the first major revelation is that in the specific cases sparking this current outrage, the data centers being blamed aren't even operational yet.
Right. There are no servers humming.
No AI algorithms running, no massive cooling systems turned on. The immediate culprit making the water cloudy isn't technology at all. It's the sheer brute force of construction. Like, we're talking about bulldozers, not algorithms.
Yeah. To understand the disconnect, you have to look at the scale of what is being built.
Sure.
When a company builds one of these hyperscale data centers, they aren't just putting up a commercial storefront or, a standard warehouse.
Frick huge, right?
Gargantuan. These are fortress-like facilities. Preparing a site of that magnitude requires deep, earth-moving, prolonged, heavy equipment operation and often explosive blasting to clear out bedrock for the foundations.
Wait, let's pause there. Because I can understand how blasting rock makes a mess on the surface. But how does building a shell of a warehouse turn a residential well miles away into a mud pit? The water is hundreds of feet underground.
It comes down to geology and the physics of how aquifers actually work. People often picture an aquifer as this giant underground lake.
Like an underground cavern full of water.
Right, but in reality, it's usually a layer of water-bearing permeable rock, gravel, sand, or silt. The water is trapped in the microscopic spaces between those materials.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so over thousands of years, the water down there becomes relatively still. And any fine particulates, like microscopic clay and silt, they just settle to the bottom or stick to the rock.
Okay, so it's a super stable environment. But when you introduce the massive seismic shocks of dynamite blasting, right, and the nonstop vibration of heavy machinery, you essentially shake the snow globe.
That is exactly what happens. You knock loose all that ancient clay and silt, allowing those particles to suspend in the groundwater and start moving with the subterranean currents.
Oh, wow. And eventually, that moving wave of suspended sediment gets sucked right up into a local resident's well intake.
Exactly. It just pulls it right in.
Now, I saw a lot of people online casually dismissing this exact phenomenon. There was this prevailing attitude in the forums of like, oh, it's just a little dirt. Let the tap run for a bit. It'll settle in a week or two. Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, I saw those comments too.
But looking at the engineering sources, I have to push back hard on that assumption. That attitude severely underestimates the cascading, permanent damage this causes for rural residents.
What's fascinating here is that it shows a profound misunderstanding of how rural water infrastructure actually functions. City dwellers are used to heavily treated, filtered municipal water lines.
Right, where the city deals with the sediment before it ever reaches a neighborhood.
Exactly. But rural systems are completely different.
Yeah, whereas many rural and semi-rural homes rely on well pumps that feed directly into their house lines. There is zero built-in municipal filtration. The water just goes from the ground, through a pump, straight to the kitchen sink.
And if you aren't prepared for it, a sudden influx of silt is catastrophic to a home.
The sources point out that this microscopic sediment quickly destroys primary water filters, like it clogs and ruins holding tanks. But the most expensive damage happens to the appliances.
Oh, absolutely. Because when silt gets pulled into a water heater, it settles at the bottom of the tank. The heating elements then basically bake that mud into a solid concrete-like layer.
It just completely trashes the water heater. You're looking at a $2,000 replacement instantly. And in worst-case scenarios, the intense seismic activity from the blasting doesn't just muddy the water.
Right, it does structural damage.
Yeah. It can cause poorly installed or older wells to physically collapse entirely. The vibrations shift the bedrock fractures that feed the well, cutting off the water supply completely.
Or they crack the PVC casing, which allows surface runoff to permanently contaminate the drinking supply. I mean, that is tens of thousands of dollars in property damage, not just a temporary inconvenience.
So that explains the immediate outrage in those viral videos. The construction phase is physically shaking the earth and muddying the wells. But thinking about the timeline, if construction is just the short-term shock.
Right. What happens next?
Exactly. What happens when the dust settles, the building is finished, and these massive facilities actually turn on? Because they don't just sit there quietly.
Not at all. Once operational, they develop a massive long-term thirst. Data centers run incredibly hot. You have thousands of high-performance servers stacked together, running complex AI models.
Just generating a tremendous amount of thermal energy.
Exactly. If you don't actively cool them, the silicon literally melts down. And moving that heat requires either a massive amount of water, a massive amount of electricity, or some complex combination of both.
When I was reading through the engineering specs and the sources, the best way I could picture these cooling systems was like a nuclear reactor.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, because in a nuclear plant, the water that evaporates out of those giant cooling towers never actually touches the radioactive core. There are two separate loops to prevent contamination. And data centers seem to operate on a similar principle, right?
That is a highly accurate analogy. Modern cooling systems usually utilize separate fluid loops. The primary loop circulates very specific fluids right at the server racks to pull the heat away.
But then you have to cool that fluid.
Right. The bulk of the water consumed by a data center is actually used to cool the system that is cooling the equipment. And this leads to a massive debate right now in the industry between using open loop versus closed loop systems.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with open loop, which the sources also refer to as evaporative cooling. From what I gather, this is the traditional tried and true method.
It's the standard, yeah.
It's cheaper to build, and crucial for the tech companies, it consumes significantly less electricity. But the trade-off is this insatiable demand for water. It requires pulling millions of gallons of fresh water straight from the local aquifer.
Yeah, an open loop system constantly pulls in fresh, clean water, runs it through a heat exchanger to absorb the thermal energy from the servers, and then evaporates a huge portion of that hot water directly into the atmosphere through cooling towers.
Which obviously lowers the local water table, making it harder for those neighboring rural wells to even draw water in the summer. But there's another insidious side effect mentioned in our sources. It's not just about taking water away.
It's about what stays behind.
Exactly. It is about the chemistry of what gets left behind.
Right, the concentration problem. Let's walk through the mechanics of that. Imagine a data center built in a semi-rural area surrounded by large-scale farming.
Pretty common scenario.
Very common. The local aquifer naturally has some agricultural runoff in it, specifically nitrates from crop fertilizers. In their normal natural dilution, those nitrates might be perfectly manageable for the ecosystem.
But when the data center pulls in millions of gallons of that slightly nitrate-laced water and then evaporates it, only the pure H2O leaves the cooling tower. The nitrates don't evaporate.
Exactly. They stay behind in the cooling basin. You are essentially distilling the water. Over days and weeks, you are left with a vastly reduced volume of wastewater, but with incredibly toxic, dense concentrations of those nitrates and local heavy minerals.
And if that highly concentrated wastewater makes its way back into the local environment, say, through a leaky retention pond or improper discharge, it poisons the local well water, rendering it totally unsafe to drink.
And this isn't just a hypothetical engineering concern, right?
No, the sources highlight a very real-world example of this. Amazon recently settled a significant fine in Northeast Oregon over nitrate pollution leaking into local wells from their data center operations.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, Amazon did not admit wrongdoing in the settlement, but they paid the fine. So facing intense public backlash over draining aquifers and evaporative pollution, the industry claims they're pivoting. Big players are shifting away from evaporative towers and toward closed-loop systems.
Closed-loop systems sound like the perfect environmental solution on paper. They use a technology called DX cooling, which stands for direct expansion.
Direct expansion, got it.
Because it's a sealed, continuous loop, they don't need to constantly pull in and evaporate millions of gallons of fresh local water.
Okay, closed loop sounds ideal. But basic physics tells me if you seal a system so water doesn't escape into the atmosphere, that thermal energy still has to go somewhere. You're trapping whatever's inside those pipes. So what is the actual cost of keeping the system sealed?
The cost is energy and incredibly complex chemistry. First, let's look at the DX cooling mechanism. Direct expansion works similarly to your kitchen refrigerator, but on a massive industrial scale.
Okay, making sense.
It uses a chemical refrigerant that expands into a gas to absorb heat, and then uses massive mechanical compressors to condense it back into a liquid to release that heat outside. Running those massive compressors requires a staggering amount of electricity. Your power grid demands just skyrocket.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because beyond the electricity, the chemical reality of a sealed water loop is even more problematic. You have water constantly circulating in a sealed metal loop year after year. Basic chemistry dictates that water plus metal equals rust.
Always.
If you just leave it there, it is going to corrode the pipes from the inside out.
Right. To prevent millions of dollars in equipment failure from corrosion, operators have to heavily treat the sealed water. They inject specialized chemicals, specifically nitrite-based corrosion inhibitors.
But reading through the environmental reports, solving the corrosion instantly creates a severe biological problem. Those nitrite-based inhibitors act as a massive all-you-can-eat buffet for certain bacteria and fungi inside the dark, warm pipes.
It's a perfect breeding ground.
Yeah? So now you've prevented the rust, but you've triggered an algae and bacteria bloom inside your multi-million-dollar cooling system.
Which forces the operators to introduce a second layer of chemistry. You must add highly toxic industrial biocides to the water loop simply to kill the bacteria that are eating your corrosion inhibitors.
It is a complete chemical catch-22. You have a sealed loop full of corrosion inhibitors, dead bacteria, toxic biocides, and suspended minerals. And eventually, this heavily treated water gets saturated.
The mineral scale builds up on the heat exchangers.
Exactly. They can't just leave that chemical soup in there forever, or the system loses its thermal efficiency.
When the mineral scale and chemical byproducts build up too much, the operators have to perform what the industry calls a blowdown.
A blowdown.
Yes, they periodically purge the system, forcefully expelling thousands of gallons of this highly mineralized, chemically treated biocide water out of the loop to make room for fresh water.
And where does that blowdown water go?
Well, in many of these semi-rural builds, it gets sent directly into the municipal waste stream.
So these tiny rural water treatment plants, which were built decades ago to handle regular household wastewater from a population of a few thousand people, are suddenly getting hit with industrial volumes of biocide-laced mineral water.
Right. And they physically cannot filter out those heavy industrial chemicals before that water returns to the local rivers or groundwater. The infrastructure was simply never designed for it.
So if both options are a disaster for the local environment, either using an open-loop system that drains the aquifer and concentrates agricultural nitrates, or a closed-loop system that dumps toxic biocides and mineral blowdowns into tiny municipal plants, how on earth are these massive builds still being approved by rural counties?
To understand how this happens, we have to look at the systemic shield. There is a deeply entrenched regulatory and legal reality that allows this infrastructure to expand at breakneck speed, often bypassing local friction.
Now, to explore this, we have to look at the political context brought up in our source thread regarding Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, and recent presidential executive orders. And I need to pause here and make something abundantly clear to you, our listener.
Very important point here.
We are absolutely not taking a political side here. We are not endorsing any viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing. We are simply impartially reporting the claims exactly as they are debated in our source material.
Right. And the specific claim being debated in the sources is that some politicians, including AOC, are arguing that data center construction has been heavily fast-tracked by executive orders at the federal level.
The core argument in the thread is that these fast-tracking orders are intentionally bypassing the rigorous standard environmental assessments that would normally take years to complete.
Assessments that would typically catch these issues and prevent a construction site from destroying a local water table. And even when those environmental laws are technically still in place, there is a massive issue with local enforcement and corporate loopholes. Yes, there are strict federal and state laws prohibiting sediment-laden discharge from construction sites.
So they know about them.
Oh, the developers absolutely know about these erosion control rules.
But the sources indicate they often just play dumb or willfully ignore them. Because if we look at the financial incentives, what actually happens if they get caught failing to build proper retention ponds or silt fences?
Usually the county issues a fine, but let's put that in perspective. For a multi-billion-dollar tech corporation rushing to build a $2 billion hyperscale AI data center, a $50,000 local environmental fine is not a deterrent.
Right, it's a drop in the bucket.
It is simply budgeted as a minor cost of doing business. Economically, it is far cheaper to pay recurring fines than to delay construction by 3 months to build adequate environmental shielding.
That has to be incredibly frustrating for the people living there. But surely, if a multi-billion-dollar company physically ruins your well with their blasting or poisons your water with their blowdown, you as a citizen can sue them, right?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it seems like you should be able to. But the legal reality facing local residents is an incredibly steep uphill battle. The sources detail a legal defense frequently utilized in these situations called the Yearsley Doctrine.
Wait, let's pause on that for our listeners because this is mind-blowing. I had never heard of this before reading these sources. You were saying if a tech giant ruins my well, I might not be able to sue them because they are using a specific legal loophole. How does a corporate data center qualify for protection under something called the Yearsley Doctrine?
So the Yearsley Doctrine stems from a very old Supreme Court case, initially meant for public works, like building the Hoover Dam.
Okay, public works.
Essentially, it acts as a get-out-of-jail-free card for government contractors. It states that if a company is building something authorized and directed by the federal government, they can claim immunity from liability for property damage caused during construction, provided they strictly follow the government specifications.
But these are private tech companies building private servers.
True, but many of these modern AI and cloud infrastructure projects are heavily subsidized, authorized, or directed by federal initiatives declaring internet infrastructure as critical national security. By tying their private builds to federal authorizations, these tech giants can attempt to shield themselves with Yearsley immunity.
So a rural homeowner whose well casing has just shattered, leaving their family without drinking water, is suddenly trying to sue a trillion-dollar tech company in court only to find that the company is legally shielding itself behind federal government immunity. That is David versus a financially invincible Goliath.
It is entirely disproportionate. It makes it incredibly difficult, almost impossible, for average citizens to get just compensation under the takings clause of the Constitution. Unless you have the millions of dollars required to fight a federal jurisdictional battle, proving liability and securing a payout is a losing game.
And we see the grim culmination of all these systemic failures, the construction damage, the cooling pollution, and the regulatory loopholes in a specific case study highlighted in our sources, Memphis.
Right, Memphis.
Memphis is described in the thread as an absolute horror show for data center development.
It is a textbook example of what happens when rapid technological expansion collides with vulnerable populations and aging infrastructure.
Let's unpack the Memphis story because it isn't just a random location. The sources show a deliberate pattern. These centers were placed near lower-income areas in Memphis, areas with historically aging, poorly maintained municipal infrastructure where the local population has fewer resources to fight zoning boards.
And the operational details are shocking. It wasn't just bad construction practices. The developers utilized illegal, unregulated gas turbines.
And we have to ask why they use those illegal turbines. Because, as we discussed with the closed-loop systems, the local Memphis power grid simply could not handle the massive spike in electricity required to run the data center's compressors.
Exactly.
Instead of waiting for grid upgrades, they brought in massive gas turbines, operating them far beyond their permitted hours, creating intense local air and noise pollution.
On top of entirely mismanaging their cooling wastewater, dumping it into a municipal system that couldn't handle it, the Memphis case perfectly illustrates the realities of this dynamic.
Right.
These facilities are fundamentally not designed to service or integrate with the demands of the communities that have to live beside them. They are designed to service the global internet.
Which means the local community assumes 100% of the physical environmental risk while reaping almost none of the digital reward.
This raises an important question. How do we balance the insatiable demand for internet infrastructure with the basic human right to clean drinking water in communities that lack the legal resources to fight back?
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to look at the massive journey we've been on today. We started with a viral, almost unbelievable headline about AI ruining tap water.
Right, the muddy water in the glass.
But we discovered it's not a glitch in the matrix. It's the reality of well aquifer geology and the violent, destructive power of construction blasting. We explored the impossible engineering trade-offs between open-loop systems that drain our water tables and closed-loop systems that require toxic biocides.
And finally, we uncovered the legal loopholes, like the Yearsley Doctrine, that shield these trillion-dollar developers from basic accountability. It is a deeply complex web where subterranean geology, industrial chemistry, and corporate law all intersect directly beneath the ground we walk on.
So what does this all mean for you? It means that the digital world you interact with every day is not actually invisible. Every single time you access the cloud, every time you stream a high-definition movie, or every time you query an AI for a quick summary, that instantaneous action relies on a very real, very massive physical building.
It really does.
And that building is fundamentally altering the geography, the water table, and the legal landscape of a rural community somewhere. Your invisible digital footprint has a very heavy physical weight.
It's a sobering reminder that the ethereal cloud is actually constructed of steel, concrete, massive electrical draw, and our most precious resource, water.
Absolutely. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It builds on a really fascinating out-of-the-box question raised by one of the users deep in our source material.
Oh, I loved this part.
Right. As they looked at all this land-based destruction, the ruined wells, and the legal fights, they asked, why don't we just build these massive data centers in the ocean?
I mean, from a pure engineering standpoint, it is a highly provocative idea. You could potentially use the infinite, naturally cold water of the deep ocean as a massive, closed-loop heat exchanger, entirely bypassing the need for terrestrial aquifers or chemical evaporative towers.
Right. As fresh water becomes vastly scarcer on land, and these environmental battles with rural communities become more litigious and expensive, will the future of the cloud literally be forced to the bottom of the sea?
It's a real possibility.
And if we do that, if we start dumping the massive, continuous thermal exhaust of human knowledge directly into the ocean, what entirely new, unforeseen chain reaction of environmental consequences might that unleash on our delicate marine ecosystems?
We might solve the crisis in our local aquifers only to spark a much larger thermal crisis in our global oceans.
It is definitely something to think about the next time you reach for a glass from the cupboard, turn on the tap, and wait to see exactly what pours out. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the physical footprint of your digital world, and we will catch you next time.